John F. Kennedy by Kendra, Jasmine, Michaela, Brooke, and Jamie. On the south coast of Cuba, Cuban exiles launched an invasion at the Bay of Pigs on April 15, 1961. Before JFK's inauguration, he was aware of the Eisenhower administration. The Eisenhower administration was to train Cuban exiles for invasion on their own country. The main goal was to make Cuba friendly to the USA. In March 1960, the training program was approved by Eisenhower. Training camps were set up in Guatemala. By November, they had trained a small army for assault, landing, and warfare. Cuban exiles were led by Jose Cardona. The exiles in Miami knew the invasion plans, even though the government was trying to hide it. The original plan was to have 2 airstrikes against the Cuban airbase. Paratroopers were to drop before the invasion to slow down the Cubans' transportation. At the same time, another force was to land on the eastern side of Cuba to create confusion. The main force was to go across the entire island to set up a defensive position. On April 15, 1961, 8 bombers left Nicaragua to bomb Cuban airfields. Many World War II B-26 bombers were painted to look like Cuban planes. Many bombers missed their targets. Cubans figured out about the painted planes and warned several others about them. President Kennedy canceled the second airstrike.
On August 18, 1961, East Germany began constructing a wall between the 2 sections of Berlin. Refugees from East Germany in the eastern section of Berlin had been flooding into the western section of Berlin, creating an embarrassment for the Soviet and East German governments. In June 1961, President John F. Kennedy met with the Soviet Premier Nikita in Vienna, Austria. But the conference failed to resolve the long-standing conflict over the status of Berlin. He wanted the U.S., Britain, and France to leave western section of Berlin. The Berlin Wall ended the movement of the East German citizens into West Berlin. In a protest, thousands of Berliners gathered on both sides of the new barricade. Kennedy was under pressure to act, but privately expressed an unwillingness to go to war over East Germany's right to impose its own borders. The construction of the wall provided the Cold War with a tangible incarnation of the Iron Curtain and marked the beginning of the de facto agreement between the superpowers. Both the U.S. and the Soviet Union allowed the city to remain divided and limited their action to protest the spirit of Berlin.
The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, or the Great March on Washington, was one of the largest political rallies for human rights in United States history. The march took place in Washington, D.C. The march was organized by a group of civil rights, labor, and religious organization under the theme Jobs and Freedom. On Wednesday, August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr., standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial, delivered his I Have a Dream speech, in which he called an end to racism. After the march, the speakers traveled to the White House for a brief discussion of proposal civil rights legislation with President Kennedy. Kennedy watched King's speech on the TV and was very impressed. The march was considered a triumph of managed protest, and Kennedy felt it was a victory for him as well, and the chances for his civil rights bill.
James Howard Meredith is a civil rights activist who became the first African American to attend the University of Mississippi in 1962. After high school, he spent 9 years in the Army Air Force. In 1962, he applied to the all-white University of Mississippi. He was admitted, but his mission was withdrawn when they discovered his race. Although the district court ruled against him, the case made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled in his favor. When Meredith arrived at Mississippi to register for classes on September 20, 1962, he found an interest block. There was a riot and 500 U.S. Marshals had to come. On October 1, 1962, James Meredith became the first black student to enroll at the University of Mississippi. Meredith graduated with a degree in political science in 1963. He wrote a book of experience titled 3 Years in Mississippi, which was published in 1966. He went on to receive a master's degree in economics from the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. He also got a law degree from Columbia University in 1968. James Meredith is still alive today and living in Jackson, Mississippi with his second wife, Judy Holsbrook.
John F. Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States. He was assassinated at 12:30 p.m. Central Time, 1830 UTC on Friday, November 22, 1963 in De La Plaza, Dallas, Texas. Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone, and that Jack Ruby was also acted alone when he killed Oswald before he could stand trial. Kennedy was fatally shot by a sniper while traveling with his wife, Jacqueline, Texas Governor John Colony, and Colony's wife, Natalie, in a presidential motorcade. The initial draft of the report stated that a bullet had entered his back of his head at a point above his shoulder at the right of his spine. but the following up on the result of the autopsy showed that a bullet had entered the back of his neck slightly to the right of his spine. Take it. Here you go.
Is there any